Hello friends, it is Link, the Gulf Coast Gardener. Today is Tuesday, July the 30th, and we have had a rough stretch of weather here in Jamaica Beach on the west end of Galveston Island. First, we had a tropical depression called Alberto that hit landfall in Mexico, but before it did that, we had 7 or 8 days of steady 40-mile-an-hour winds, which beat up the plants to no end. We then had a couple of super high tides, which resulted in a flooded yard on 2 consecutive days. We had about a foot of water in the yard, and so all of my yard plants were flooded with salt water. Soon after, Hurricane Beryl hit very close to Galveston. Same story, incredibly high winds, this time 100 miles an hour in Jamaica Beach. We also had over a foot of water in our yard, and so the plants got a double dose of salt water. So if you're like me, you're tired of replacing plants because of floods and freezes, but I think I found 12 plants that will survive a saltwater flood, and most of these will survive freezes as well. So let's go take a look. As you saw in the intro, this entire area was under a foot to a foot and a half of water on 2 different occasions this month. But check it out, these plants are actually doing just fine. Now the first plant, this is a star jasmine. I have quite a few of these around the house. And while it did drop a lot of leaves, it still has plenty of new green growth, so I think it's gonna come back no problem. Now, if they're well established, they usually survive freezes as well. And it looks like salt water is not a big deal for star jasmine now. These are birds of paradise. Now these have the bright orange flowers. You'll also see them in the nursery with the white flowers. And the plants are a lot bigger and the leaves are even bigger. Now these have these really tough, kind of stiff, brittle leaves, and they're very hardy plants. These guys freeze back in the winter when we have a freeze, but they come back no problem. And these 2 have survived 4 or 5 saltwater floods. So it is no doubt in my mind that these will survive both freeze and saltwater. So birds of paradise with the bright yellow flowers are super hardy. Another star jasmine, more birds of paradise. You can see, you really can't even tell there was a flood over here. They look nice and green and beautiful. More star jasmine, more birds of paradise. And back here I have a giant leopard plant. I love this guy. Most people grow these in containers or they grow them in a very shaded spot. Now this is facing west, which isn't ideal, but it gets plenty of shade from the other plants. Now this will come back from a freeze, no problem. It froze to the ground over Christmas. It grew back big and beautiful and lush, as you can see in this picture. And now it is greened up again already after 2 saltwater floods. So it looks like the giant leopard plant will survive both saltwater floods and freezes. Now this is a Peggy Martin rose. I had beautiful roses this year. It grew all up and down the stairwell. Was really happy with how this grew. Now roses are very well known to survive freezes, so that's really not a concern. But the saltwater flood, it's famous for surviving saltwater floods. And this guy's been under 2 different foot floods of water. And you can see, nice and green, new leaves. It dropped a lot of leaves, of course, because of the wind and the crazy hurricane conditions. But look, it's nice and green and no problems. Now wandering over this way, this is a bit of surprise to me. This is a bougainvillea. When we lived in Phoenix, these things were all over the place and they love full sun, which is where I have mine planted. And I actually thought the saltwater flood would kill them. So after the first flood, they had some yellow leaves on them. The second flood, more yellow leaves, but look, they look just fine. I think most of the damage is really from the high winds, but we had a lot of rain as well during these past events. And so I think that helped dilute the salt water. But bottom line is, there was a foot of salt water right where I'm standing, and these bougainvillea are doing just fine. Now these are my Mexican oleander. I've made a bunch of videos on these plants. I absolutely love it. Let me back up. These guys are huge. I actually have 3 plants in there. It's almost as if they enjoyed the salt water. The winds didn't seem to bother them, blew them around a little bit, but check it out. Beautiful and green and lush. They don't always survive freezes, as you can see from that big root over there. That is my original Mexican oleander that died, which I got all the seed for all the plants I've had since then. But check these guys out. Absolutely beautiful. Saltwater flood, no problem. Now these are spider lilies. I see these all around Jamaica Beach. They're a very popular plant. They're really low maintenance. They've got these beautiful white flowers. Check it out. Absolutely beautiful. Look how they're spreading. I literally do nothing to these guys and they keep getting bigger and bigger by the year. So These come back from freezes, no problem. These are several years old. They were just under 2 different saltwater floods. You really can't even tell. They're still beautiful and green. Now this is a Mexican petunia. And while a lot of people don't care for these plants because they consider them invasive, they kind of grow out of control, which they can if you don't keep them in control. But I dig up around the edges to make sure they don't take over the whole yard. But you know what? They survive freezes, so I don't have to replace this plant every year. And you know what else? They also survive saltwater floods. Look at this. You can tell it's a little beat up by the wind and maybe the salt water. Those flowers aren't real happy, but you know what? Look, it is covered in new blooms. In a few days, this is going to be blowing up with purple flowers. So Mexican petunia will survive saltwater floods as well as freezes. Now stepping over here, this is a bit of a mess. This is a kind of a pile of dead looking plants and weeds and dollarweed, which is the bane to my existence. But this is mistflower. This is a beautiful flowering native perennial, good down to zone 7 if I'm not mistaken. So there's no problem with it with freezes here in Jamaica Beach. And look, it's coming back from the salt water as well. So what I'm going to do is just mow over this. I'm going to get rid of all the dead material, get rid of the dollarweed if possible, and then I'll have another patch of mistflower here, no problem. Now stepping over here, now I really need to start getting some native milkweed growing, but what I have today is the tropical milkweed. I know there are issues with it, but bear with me. So tropical milkweed, check it out. It's doing quite well. I'm going to cut all these big stems back, but it comes back from freezes apparently, because it's still here a couple years in. And saltwater floods, it's not happy about the wind and the flood, but look, it's nice and green, no problems. So tropical milkweed will survive both freeze and flood. Now the east side of the house, of course, also had 1 foot to 1.5 foot of water on 2 different occasions recently, but I do have some success to talk about, so check these guys out. This is an entire patch of the common blue violet. This is a native flowering perennial. It's native to about half of the country, so it's very well may be native in your area. And check it out. After 2 saltwater floods, they are nice and green, and they are coming back no problem. Now they are good down to zone 5, so it's no problem here in my zone 9B. So freezes here are not a problem. Now these make the most beautiful, lush green ground cover. They also have these gorgeous purple flowers, so they flower really early in the spring, some of the earliest flowers that you will have in the spring. So plant some common violets. They're also the host plant for several varieties of fritillary butterflies. So a great reason to get into native plants, which I want to do more and more, but I also need things that will survive freezes and floods. Now, here are some more of those star jasmine. You can see they look just fine, no problem. Now that's a citronella plant. Clearly, it did not survive the saltwater flood. It also will die in the freeze. I just had a pretty one there that was growing this summer. Well, it used to be pretty. Now that is another star jasmine, obviously, and check these guys out. These are society garlics, or they're in the allium family, the onion family, and look, they are doing really well. Now I do need to clean up these plants. I didn't do anything to any of these plants before the video, so you see them in their natural state after the winds, after the hurricane, after the floods, and look, they're really pretty. Nice and green, they're lush, they're beautiful. When I clean these up, you won't even know there was a hurricane or that they flooded. So society garlic, flowers almost year-round around here. Freezes are no problem, and apparently floods are no problem either. So there you have it. There's 12 plants that will survive a flood, and most of them will survive a freeze. So if you're like me and you're tired of replacing plants, try a few of these. Hey, thanks for watching. As always, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, and of course, as always, have a fantastic day.